Okay, so welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I want to thank Alexis for opening up her home again to our class. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to get up the today's class is Leilu Nishmat Le'a Bat Rachel Alea Shalom, and for Fu'a Shelema. Anybody who may be in need, you could feel free to insert a name. Okay, so I thought today we might share some thoughts about Hanukkah. After all, that is the feeling in the air, right? So I want to share with you two statements that are made in the Gemara over here by the same rabbi. One of them is about Hanukkah. The other one is seemingly has nothing to do with Hanukkah. But I'm hoping that in the course of our discussions, maybe we could try to find a connection between these two. After all, they're made by the statements made by the same rabbi, and then the only two statements we find from this rabbi in all of the Talmud. So it begs the question that maybe there's a relationship between the two of them, and we'll try to see if we can't uncover a lesson from the connection between these two statements. The first statement is a law about the candles of Hanukkah. The law states that when a person lights the Hanukkah candles, they are not allowed to put the Hanukkah candles too high up. So over what the Gemara calls 20 amot, 20 cubits, which a cubit is approximately 1.5 feet. So we'll just, for argument's sake, say 30 feet. When a person lights the Hanukkah candles, they may not light the Hanukkah candles higher than 30 feet from the ground. Why do you think that halacha is such? Exactly. Standard practice, the rabbis understood, is that a person has a certain periphery as far as what they see on average. And we know that so many of the laws of the Hanukkah candles are governed by wanting people to see them and to spread the miracle. So the rabbis measured out that the average passerby has a certain peripheral vision. And if the candles are placed above 20 amot, above 30 feet high, the person will not be able to see them unless they make a conscious effort of looking up to go ahead and see them, which we don't assume that they're going to do. And therefore, we want to place the candles of Hanukkah, light them at a height which will be reasonable for people to go ahead and see them when they pass by. This law makes sense, yes? So obviously, many questions get asked today. What if a person lives in a very high-rise building, right, an apartment? So just to briefly answer that question, today, like let's say you live in the city, there's a lot of apartment buildings. So one benefit is you can light, and the people in the other building are able to see you because there's multiple buildings that are of that height. That's one answer. Another answer is that today, once upon a time, they used to light the Hanukkah candles really outside their door, really outside. Today, most of us light it by a window, as Alexis beautifully has it displayed over there, right? They light by a window. Some people don't even have a good window that's open really to a public domain. Many people just develop the practice of lighting on their dining room table or lighting in a room for their own families to see. So in this day and age, the Pirsum Hanes, the spreading of the miracle, isn't always for the people outside. More often, it's for the people who are inside, for your family members, which gives even more support to what I told you before of having a strong family get together when you're lighting the candles. So that's the ideal. But sometimes we don't have the ideal. So as long as if a person lives in an apartment building and they have no other option, so then obviously they're going to light the candles, and whoever's in their apartment or their neighbors or people who walk around the building, they'll see it. The people outside won't see it. But if I'm in a situation like we have here, to light on my second floor 30 feet up as opposed to on my first floor, you wouldn't do that because then the people cannot see the candles. So that's the first law. Seems like a very simple, very straightforward law. By the way, this law has two sister laws connected to it. The same law applies to building a sukkah. When a person builds a sukkah, they may not build their sukkah 20 amot high, because then they won't be able to see the schach. They won't be able to see the roof. And the whole idea of sitting in a sukkah is to be conscious of the fact that you are under a temporary roof. Another law is when a person has an eruv, they're not supposed to place the eruv over 20 amot, because people need to see where the eruv is so that they know where they can carry and where they can't carry, right? So we have this idea that finds its way into a number of different laws, number of different halachot, that you're not supposed to put something that people should be conscious of, people should be able to see. You shouldn't put it too high because it will escape the vision of the people. Good? Okay. Here comes this, that's the statement one. That's the first statement by this rabbi. His name is Rav Kahana. Comes the second statement of Rav Kahana, and he says something from this past week's parasha. He says, when the brothers came and threw Yosef into the pit, before they decided to sell him, first they wanted to kill him. Reuven told him, don't kill him, throw him into the pit. So they strip him of his coat, and they take him and they throw him into the pit. And the Torah tells us what was the nature of this pit. This might be famous for a lot of people. It says, Habor rek en bo mayim. What does Habor rek mean? The pit was empty, it was dry, there was nothing in it. En bo mayim, there was no water in the pit. The pit was empty, there's no water in the pit. Rabbis look at that pasuk and they say, this is a very strange way to phrase it. What's bothersome to the rabbis about that phrase? Repetitive, right? You told me the pit was empty. If you tell me the pit was empty, then my understanding is there's nothing in the pit. So obviously there's no water in the pit. Why are you telling me the pit is empty? There's no water in the pit. Alexis? It says rek, it's empty. So maybe there could be somebody digging something in that gets there. Usually a pit is there just to like collect rainwater. It's not like a natural spring that you can get water out of it. It's really about what collects it. So the brothers looked in, they saw there was no water in there. They throw him in. It tells us the pit was empty. There was no water. So this is the famous Gemara. And this is where we learn it in grade school. The rabbis say, how do they resolve the contradiction between the fact that the pit was empty and there was no water? They say, there was no water in the pit, but there were snakes and scorpions in the pit. And that's very nice, right? So obviously a miracle happened for Yosef. He was thrown into a pit with snakes and scorpions, very dangerous animals, and he was pulled out unscathed before he was sold by his brothers. But he was saved miraculously by Hashem. Anybody have a problem with the snakes and scorpions interpretation, or you're good with it? You're good with it. It's okay to undo or to have a problem with what you learned in second grade. Maybe. They live in desert areas. I'm okay with that. Very good. Excellent, Iris, right? Iris says, but the rabbinic interpretation that there were snakes and scorpions contradicts what the Torah itself tells us. The Torah said the pit is empty, there's no water. The rabbi is saying, there wasn't water, but there were snakes and scorpions. But it says the pit was empty, which means that there's no snakes and scorpions. So I don't understand. Are the rabbis coming to contradict? Okay, so maybe they came in after. We could try to play around with this, but ultimately, it's troubling that the rabbis would give us an interpretation that contradicts the actual text in the Torah. The rabbis, why would they do such a thing, right? That seems so strange, right? And we all take this for granted. Yes, snakes and scorpions, it's a miracle, Yosef. We love that story. But wait a minute. The rabbis are undermining the actual words in the Torah because it says the pit was empty. So how does that make any sense? That's question number one. And question number two is, what does this have anything to do with Hanukkah? Because, right? What does this have anything to do with Hanukkah? This is the two statements that this rabbi made, and it comes right after this law about not putting the Hanukkah candles too high, right? The rabbis are talking, if you looked at this whole chapter, they're talking all about the laws of Hanukkah and the laws of lighting candles and Shabbat and Hanukkah. And then all of a sudden they stick in this very odd statement about the pit and Yosef was thrown in and what it was. What's the connection over here? What's going on? Very good. Okay, good. By the way, it's not a coincidence that the story of Yosef is always the parashiot. It's always the story that we read around Chanukah time. Vayeshev Miketz. This week's parasha is Miketz. Last week's parasha was Vayeshev. It wasn't actually Chanukah. It was the day before Chanukah. Always the story of Yosef is read in the Torah on the weeks that we deal with Chanukah. So obviously the rabbi saw some sort of connection over here. So the Torah Tamimah, rabbi by the name of Rabbi Baruch Epstein, he makes this comment over here. He says, maybe the pit that Yosef was thrown in was deeper than 20 amot. And just like a person cannot see height-wise above 20 amot with the candles, so too a person cannot see down deep beyond 20 amot, which means that the brothers, when they threw Yosef into the pit, they did not see that there were snakes and scorpions in the pit. And therefore, when the Torah says the pit is empty, there was no water, the Torah is speaking in whose perspective? It's speaking from the brother's point of view. It's not speaking in reality. That's the shift. We thought that the Torah was telling us a fact. The pit is empty, there's no water. Rabbi Epstein says, no, it's not telling us a fact. It's telling us what the brothers saw. When they looked in the pit, they saw an empty pit with no water. They did not see that there were snakes and scorpions all the way on the bottom of that pit. All they cared about was that there was no water in the pit. Why would they care that there's no water in the pit? Well, maybe because they don't want Yosef to drown. In other words, they want him to die sort of slowly, because that's what their plan was. They don't want to drown him, but also they don't want him to have water because he could survive that way, right? So the brothers are looking to see, can he survive in the pit? They don't see any water. They say, no problem, throw him in. Had they known that there were snakes and scorpions at the bottom of the pit, perhaps they wouldn't have thrown him in, because that's a death sentence. That means they basically threw him to the lions, right? They basically threw him down there knowing that he was going to die. As well, think about the fact that when they pulled Yosef out of the pit to eventually save him, if they knew there were snakes and scorpions at the bottom of the pit, what should have gone through their mind? That what? That he's going to die. No, but they're pulling him out now. Maybe we're going to pull the snakes and scorpions with him. What else? If they knew they just threw Yosef into a pit with snakes and scorpions, and now they pull him out and he's still alive, what realization should they have come to?
That Hashem's with him.
That Hashem saved him, right? They should have recognized, wait a minute, Hashem just did an amazing miracle for Yosef. Maybe selling him isn't the best idea right now. If Hashem made such a miracle to save him, maybe that's God's way of telling us, back away from Yosef, right? But the brothers didn't put that together because they didn't realize what was at the bottom of that pit. They just thought, okay, he stayed out there and we pulled him out, right? So the brothers are really missing a key component of what's going on because they cannot see to what really is happening. Yosef, on the other hand, he knows what was going on down there. He was there. He realizes the miracle that Hashem did for him to save him. And he realizes what God did to protect him. And I'm going to get back to Yosef in a minute. So what now might be, now we're starting to connect the dots between this idea of the Chanukah candles being over 20 amot, Yosef being thrown into a pit that may have been deeper than 20 amot. People are not able to see certain things when they're beyond their peripheral vision. And I like to suggest that might be a major message of the holiday of Chanukah and what the Chanukah candles represent. The Chanukah candles represent illuminating things that are happening around us from Hashem that we often don't pay attention to. And think about the fact that on Chanukah, there's two major miracles that happen. There's the miracle of winning the war against the Greeks, the battle that took place, and there's the lighting of the candles that lasted for 8 days. Which of those is the more important miracle? Why?
Because they survived. The Jews survived because of the sin.
Exactly. Without the war, it was 100% right. The war is really the essential miracle. If they don't win the war against the Greeks, there's nothing to talk about, right? There is no lighting, there is no Beit HaMikdash. It's all for naught, right? The miracle of the war, though, could exist without the miracle of the candles. If they didn't have the miracle of the candles, we would have moved on, right? The miracle of the war, you can't possibly move on unless we defeated the Greeks. So the miracle of defeating the Greeks is the essential miracle that we're celebrating. Yet, what does everybody focus on the holiday of Chanukah? All the focus is on the candles. All of the rituals, all of the laws, everything about the celebration is solely fixated on the candles. And the question is, why? Why are we emphasizing what appears to be the less important of the two miracles? Any thoughts? Which one? The candles is the physical, that's the physical representation of it. So when we're lighting the candles, we of course should be thinking about the miracles, right? And there's no question when we say Al Hanisim and when we say the prayers after we light the candles, we speak a lot about the Maccabees and we speak a lot about the Chashmonaim and their sacrifice to want to fight and win the war against them. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
For us, represents Torah and learning. And so by us lighting it, we're showing that the Greeks wanted to destroy us spiritually as well. So we're showing that our spiritualness didn't die.
Great. So I like Frida's point over here. It wasn't what I was going to say, but it's a great point as well. There's a lot of answers to this question. If we only emphasized the winning of the war, we would have thought to ourselves, what was important here was that we became free, independent people. We became free politically. But that's actually not the case. Even after the miracle of Hanukkah, the Jews still were under Greek rule for many decades after that, right? They had a level of sovereignty, had a level of independence, but not 100%. There were many wars that raged on even beyond that. The difference was in the miracle of Hanukkah, we got our religious freedom back. That's the most important thing. So perhaps the emphasis on the miracle of the candles, which the candles represent Torah and spirituality, is to remind us that the winning of the war wasn't just winning the war, wasn't just getting rid of our enemies. It was the ability to now be religiously free. And that was the most important thing. That's why the Hashmonaim fought the fight. For Jews can live under the rule of a lot of other people. As long as we can be religiously free, we won't ruffle feathers. We won't fight battles. We won't rebel. We'll pay taxes to people whatever we need. But the minute somebody tries to take away our religious freedom, then we have a problem. Now we're going to have to step in and fight a fight to preserve our way of life. And so the candles represent what we gained as a result of winning the war, our Torah and our light that we can maintain. I love that answer as well.
I think it's also maybe about appreciating the small wins in life, the small joys, and not just always looking for something big and exciting, and that our lives are just much richer when we.
So how does it do that?
Because you could focus on the war, like what's bigger than winning a war? There's really not much bigger. And then everyone's making a big deal about, you had to go, I'm assuming, go into the Beit HaMikdash to see the candles, and that, you could talk about the warriors, you can talk about the strategy, you can talk about the politics, but focusing on something, a small miracle, I think it just translates into our lives. That,
So you're looking at the miracle of the candles as being more of the secondary one. By focusing on that, it tells us to appreciate not only the thing that's obvious, but
not that it's secondary, that it's just, you have to pay attention. You have to have looked for that. You have to have looked for that.
So it's funny you say, because I was going to take the same idea, but I was going to reverse it, right? I'll tell you why, because the candles was supernatural, right? If you think about it, the candles was a supernatural miracle. So it's obvious to everybody when you see the candles and you see that a little bit of oil that should have burnt out lasted for 8 days. All of a sudden, everyone's like, okay, that's obvious to me, right? The miracle is glaring, pardon the pun, to a person's eyes. The battle, however, there are ways that people could explain those away, right? You listen to testimonials of Israeli generals after the 6-day war, or after the Yom Kippur War, or really after any war that Israel has ever had to fight in its history, because in every single war Israel has ever had to fight, we've been clearly the underdog, right? We've clearly been outnumbered, outweaponed, Arabs all around us. We've always been at a disadvantage, maybe until now when our army now has become strong. But in Israel's history, we've always been the ma'atim, the few, as opposed to the many, right? And yet there's always explanations that people could try to give as to why we won the war. The enemy made a bad strategic move. They left their planes unprotected, and we knew the territory, we knew the terrain, we played guerrilla warfare. They were arrogant, so they didn't pay attention. There's always different natural explanations that you can give as to how a small army was able to somehow defeat a larger, more trained, stronger army, right? But ultimately, the candles at the end were a reminder. They literally and figuratively shed light on the fact that the winning of the victory was a miracle from Hashem. Yes, it was heroic people like the Hashmonaim who had to stand up and fight, but ultimately their success in battle was totally because Hashem had protected them and Hashem had fought that fight for them. And so without the miracle of the candles, one could have become one could have thought to themselves, the Hashmonaim, they did a great job. They're so strong. They strategized. They had a great plan. We could try to come up with all these explanations. The miracle of the candles teaches us what to look for when we pay attention to the battle, to see that the hand of God was what was helping them. And that's where the supernatural comes in. And that's what I think connects to what we're saying over here. There are so many things that happen during the course of our lives, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, that are really orchestrated by God, that they really are the Yad Hashem. And we only notice them when we stop, pause, and reflect. And when we're attentive, when our minds are attuned to the fact that, hold it, how did that happen? Why was I there? How did that take place? Wow, it doesn't make any sense that these dots got connected this way, if not for the fact that Hashem had helped that situation to unfold the way that it was meant to unfold, right? We can easily coast throughout our days, day to day, event to event, not realizing, not paying attention, not seeing, just like the candles are above 20 amot, they're there, but we're not looking up. The snakes and scorpions are down deep, but we're not really paying attention to what's going on. We can walk around our days and things are right in front of our face, but we're not attentive to them. We're not paying attention to them. We're not seeing them. They're not illuminated for us. The candles of Chanukah represent the idea that we should be paying attention, that we should be focusing in, reflecting, really being mindful to what's going on around us and seeing how Hashem is affecting our daily lives. And when we see that, then we're able to look back and say, wow, Hashem did this for me. Hashem did that for me. We could appreciate God so much more. We can connect to God so much more. We could be thankful for the things that Hashem does so much more because we have the presence of mind to pay attention to all of the amazing things that are happening instead of simply taking them for granted. And that to me is a message of Chanukah. And that's a message that this rabbi in these two statements is saying. If you're not looking for something, if you're not mindful of it, something could be right in front of your face, like candles or snakes and scorpions, positive and negative, and you could totally miss it. Like, by the way, the brothers missed it. Great people the brothers were, but they missed it. They didn't see it. They were so consumed by their jealousy for Yosef. They had judged Yosef so quickly that they refused to pay attention. And I like to add another layer to this because we do this with not just what's happening around us, but we also do this with people as well. It becomes so easy for us to see people and to immediately judge them, to immediately have our heads wrapped around who we think they are, without taking time to really try and understand them, to really judge them favorably, to really say, maybe this person isn't what my first impression of them was. Maybe they had a reason why they did that, and I'm not really understanding it. I'm just glancing at it and I'm making a quick assumption that that's who they are or that's why they did that. And I'm not really taking the time to pay attention. I'm not using the light that's around them to illuminate who they really are. The brothers did this to Yosef. They saw a 17-year-old boy who was talking about his dreams, who was talking about his visions of grandeur, who had been raised up above them by their father, and their jealousy had consumed them to the point where they could not see anything from his perspective. They could not see that they have an immature young brother who's maybe a little caught up in the honor that he's being given. Maybe we should give him a little bit of time, patience, guidance. Don't judge him so quickly, and maybe let him develop a little bit more before we come to a clear labeling of who we think he is and who he will always be. The brothers didn't give him that time to be able to develop. You know, sometimes we look at a child and, you know, we see children they're a little wild. Kids 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe even in high school, he's a little wild, right? And, you know, that's who he is. We just define him as that. He's wild, he's this, he's disrespectful, and we give them labels very early on. Meanwhile, they're children, right? They're adolescents. How many of us look back into our own lives and think to ourselves, you know, I wasn't that far off, right? The kid who's giving me the most trouble, probably a lot closer to what I was. Maybe I was even a little bit worse than what he was. And look, I turned out pretty good, right? I had to go through a maturing process during the course of my life, and different things had to happen. Sometimes you just have to let things develop. Guide as much as you can. Parent, of course, as much as you can. but sometimes to just slap labels on people so early on without giving them a chance to really develop, it's not fair. It's not fair to them. It's doing what the brothers did, and it's not seeing really into the heart of the person to look for their good characteristics and see the potential. People who can look at other people and say, look, I know that they're not really finished right now. They're not refined. They have more to go, but I see the goodness in the person. I see his ability to respect, his ability to do kindness. I see that in them. And so I have to try to bring out that good out of them instead of simply dismissing them and saying, this is a lost cause. So I think both the candles of Hanukkah here and the story that we're reading here, they represent, number one, making sure that in our own lives, when we're looking around what's happening, that we should pay attention to it. That things might be above 20 amot, but we just have to look up a little bit, see the things that are happening more, look at how God is orchestrating, and then do the same thing into people as well. Look for something that might be hidden inside of somebody. Don't just come immediately to judge them, but instead hold the candles of Hanukkah next to them and see into their soul and try to say, maybe this person has a little bit more that I'm missing. Maybe I should let things develop a little bit. Maybe I haven't seen the light in this person just yet because it's buried a little bit beneath some darkness that needs to kind of be peeled away. Those layers of onion need to be removed before I could see the fruit that's really lying beneath in the person's soul. And I think that that's something the brothers missed, and something that the miracle of Hanukkah teaches us to take time and reflect and pause on those different ideas. Any questions or comments on that? Yes.
Did Yosef tell the brothers that there was?
So it's a good question. Did Yosef tell the brothers? We don't have any indication that he did, right? I don't know. Maybe he didn't have opportunity to. The brothers didn't seem to be listening very much to him. Later in the story, in this week's parasha, it tells us that Reuven tells the brothers when Yosef is giving them a hard time, when the second in command is giving them a hard time. They don't know it's Yosef, but it really is. They say, oh, Reuven tells them, you know why this is happening to us? It's happening to us because when Yosef was crying to us and was begging us not to get rid of him, we ignored him. We didn't pay attention to him. The brothers are very, very cold to Yosef. Right after they throw him in the pit, what does the Torah tell us? They sat down to have a meal. How could they sit down? They just threw their brother to die, and they're sitting down to eat, not too far away from him. And it seems like they can hear him screaming in the pit, help, help, please. And they're just on deaf ears. They're just not paying attention to him. It's a very, very cold way. I'm sure they thought they were doing the right thing, right? The rabbis say that they did a council, they judged him for sure. Yes. I mean, we're being tough on the great patriarchs of our family, right? But that's because the rabbis are tough on them. The Nevi'im are tough on them. They say that we consistently suffer for the sin of the sale of Yosef. So the brothers in that moment thought they were doing the right thing. Most people who do something like that at that time convince themselves that they're doing the right thing. But the callousness with which they handled it towards their brother, that they didn't open up their hearts, they just judged him strictly by letter of the law, is something that the rabbis tell us we should make sure to learn from, to not do that. And unfortunately, we do it so many times to our friends, to those who we know, where we see them do something and we probably could give them the benefit of the doubt. We could judge them favorably. And instead we say, well, that's the right thing, so I'm just going to go by the letter of the law, right? So it's something that we can definitely all learn from. Yeah.
The way that I would say it is that Yosef realized, obviously, God saved him for a reason. That's why he didn't tell his brothers, because he knew there was a bigger picture
Okay.
to what was going on. He didn't, as it was, he already ruffled their feathers. They already were angry at him for him telling them, you're going to bow down to me. This is going to happen.
Right.
So he knew that.
So maybe by this point already, Yosef was really letting the situation unfold. Right.
And accept it. So when
Right.
somebody's not ready to accept something, shove it down their throat.
I understand that. That could very well be a possible explanation. And on that note, I want to build to one other interesting little point that the Torah teaches us. And this could be something that we all take away for our own lives, because I think this is, again, the idea of noticing the subtleties. So the Torah tells us that when they pulled Yosef out of the pit, and there was a caravan of Ishmaelim who were walking by, and that's who they're going to sell them to. What are you going to say? Ah, very good. Yeah, I'm going to go to the spices thing, but we'll I'm sure everyone's heard this one before, but it really, it really does connect to what we're talking about. And the Torah makes a point of mentioning that this Ishmaeli caravan is carrying all these beautiful aromas. Nechot, utzri, valot, they're carrying myrrh and scents and besamim, beautifully smelling things that they're going to take with them down to Egypt. And the rabbis asked the question, like, why do we care? Why is this detail mentioned? The Torah doesn't mention a detail for no reason. Says Rashi, oh, it was a message from God to Yosef that normally these caravans would carry tar and pitch and all these very pungent, disgusting smells. But now God made it that the Ishmaelim would be carrying spices that smelled nice so that Yosef can get a nice smelling car ride down to Egypt, right? He can get the new scent, the new car smell, down to Egypt, right? And it sounds nice, but you pause for a minute and you say, like, really? Yosef's life is coming crumbling down before him, right? He's being sold by his own brothers into slavery. He cares at this moment that the people who are carrying him down to Egypt are carrying things that smell nice. Who does he care? What does he even notice? Who would pay attention to such a detail as if to say everything's what is it? What does that mean? Right. So that's exactly the point. The point is that Yosef had reached a point in his life where God was basically telling him, let things play out, but remember that I'm here in the background, right? I'm the one who's orchestrating the events. So it's right now, yes, your life looks like it's over. It looks like it can come to an end at any minute. You're not going to see your father. You're being separated at the ripe young age of 17 from your family. You're going to go down to a strange land as a slave. It seems like you have every right at this moment to totally despair and give up. But I'm going to send you a little hint to remind you that I'm here with you. And as a result, don't fret, right? Let it play out and understand that Hashem is going to orchestrate the events as he intends them to unfold, right? And did Yosef have nivuah? It's funny that you should say that, because what makes Yosef such a relatable character to us, and why I think he's someone who we analyze and speak about so much, is we don't ever find God communicate directly with Yosef. So as far as the text is concerned, my answer is no. Yosef does not ever, there's no pasuk that says that God spoke to Yosef. God spoke to Abraham, he spoke to Yitzchak, he spoke to Yaakov. After that, we don't find that God ever communicates directly with Yosef. And that's beautiful, right? Because that means that Yosef is very much like us. We don't communicate with God. But Hashem, because of Yosef's righteousness, because of his commitment and his faith to God, God finds ways to throw things into Yosef's life that he should be aware of. Sometimes Yosef gets the message, sometimes he misses the message, and he needs to learn the hard way that this is happening, right? So he gets down to Egypt and he's successful with everything that happens, and then he gets a little bit too conceited in himself. He starts to care about his looks. Hashem sends him Eshet Potifar, and he's got to adjust, and he has to. Yosef's life is a roller coaster of ups and downs, highs and lows, very much the way our lives are as well. And the key for Yosef is recognizing all of the things that Hashem is sending his way to understand that his life has a deeper meaning and something else that's being orchestrated here. That's why many people will remember when Yosef, at the end of this parasha, he tells the butler, tell Paro about me. And what did the rabbi say? He had to stay in jail for 2 more years. Why is that fair? What do you mean? Aren't you supposed to do your hishtadlut? Aren't you supposed to do your thing? Shouldn't Yosef tell the butler, yes, remind Paro about me so that he could take me out? And the answer is no. Yosef needed to realize by that point that Hashem was in control of how things were going to work. And he needed to sit back a little bit and have more emunah that Hashem would orchestrate it at the proper time that was meant to be. That's what Hashem had been signaling to him all those years through all of those different ups and downs. And Yosef, again, misses the mark and then eventually has to come to it when later on he's left in jail for 2 more years. The message that we can take away from Yosef, and I think from Chanukah, is that there are miracles all around us. There are constantly things that are happening where Hashem is involved in our lives. And there are people in our lives who are special people, who are important people, who are people who are there, put there on purpose for us to relate with and interact with. And it's important for us to realize that the miracles around us, to be attentive to them, to realize them, to look at them through the lens of the Chanukah candles and to see them and not just try to explain them away and dismiss them as being coincidence or ordinary, but rather to see how God is connecting those dots together. And then to see other people in our lives as having those places as well. And therefore not to dismiss them either, to see the goodness that might be hidden deep beneath the layers and that might be begging to come out of that darkness, but that we ourselves need to go ahead and try to unlock it. Maybe this is the reason why we say all the time, you're not allowed to use the Chanukah candles. Right after we light them, we say, En lanu reshut lehishtamesh bahem. We can't use the candles. Why can't we use the candles? Beautiful. Have candles in our room. Let us read by the candles. Let's sit by the candles. Why are we not allowed to use the candles? And I think the answer is that because if we use the candles, now we have a reasonable, logical explanation as to why they're there, right? It doesn't appear that they're special in any way. It doesn't appear that they're there to commemorate a miracle. I light candles so that I could see, right? It's a regular, ordinary occurrence. So the rabbis say, no, you're not allowed to use the candles. Those candles have to be there purely to remind you of the miracle. Don't use them for anything ordinary, because that will undermine the whole message of what the candles are, that nothing that's happening in one's life is simply by coincidence or ordinary or just happens to be, but rather it's there because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to connect the dots so that we can grow, so that we can achieve our potential, so that we can release the inner light that might be hidden deep beneath a lot of the darkness. Questions or thoughts about that? Okay. Have a great day.